These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Man, a lot has happened since we went on break for Thanksgiving. On this week's edition of Market Journal, we'll be taking a look at last year's Nebraska Ag Expo as we prepare for next week's big event in Lincoln. Eric Hunt, he's standing by with your weekly weather forecast, and Elliott Dennis, he'll join us to discuss the latest when it comes to the cattle markets. Also on this week's show, Southern rust, it was a big problem for producers toward the end of this year's growing season. We'll get some recommendations on how you should be approaching this problem coming up in 2026. Those stories are coming up on this week's show, but let's begin right here. A major Nebraska beef plant is closing. Tyson Foods announced plans to close its Lexington beef plant early next year, laying off more than 3,000 people. This is also a jolt to Nebraska's beef industry, as Steve White looks at why this plant may have been chosen and what it means for producers.
The Tyson beef plant has been a fixture in Lexington for more than 3 decades, reshaping the community while processing tens of millions of cattle. It comes with the cattle herd at its lowest level across the country in generations, as area cattlemen now consider their next steps.
I think this is the main road.
Trucks come and go as Craig Uden surveys Dar feedlot after the season's first snow. But the real storm he's weathering is Tyson's decision to close the beef plant just minutes from his feedlot.
Well, Steve, I was a little bit shocked, like everybody. There's been talk out there that a plant was going to have to close. We really didn't think it'd be this plant, but...
Elliott Dennis with UNL's Center for Ag Profitability says Tyson likely made its decision after evaluating efficiency across its entire system.
Each plant kind of has their own cost, and when we think about total plant closure, what that essentially means is that the cost to harvest an animal is less than their variable cost. That is the kind of the plant decision, and ultimately each plant has its own metric. And I think for the Tyson plant, they were looking at their plants and their portfolio and said, this is the plant that has to go.
Uden says the shock quickly gave way to resolve, finding new ways for Dar to do what it does best. The feedlot does a large share of its marketing with Tyson, but not all of it, and the team is already adjusting.
We're 7 miles from this plant, and we do a lot of business. It's not 100% of our business, but we do an awfully high percentage of our business is done at this plant. So we have to rethink. We're going to have to ship. We're going to have to load different times of the day. We're still going to work with Tyson a lot, but there's other opportunities that have popped up.
Even with Lexington closing, the region still has more processors than many states, with several other plants within range.
Sustainable's right down the road. We've got Cargill and JBS not very far away. Greater Omaha's there, so there's a lot of opportunities out there. We ship a lot to Creekstone. We feed a real high quality animal, so we want to be able to still look at grid premiums and stuff like that. So we're gonna put our cattle in the best possible way to continue on and make the most money for our producers.
Economist Elliott says packers have been preparing for a world with fewer animals long before Tyson's announcement.
We've been knowing that the cattle herd is contracting for several years. That's been the first thing. We know we were going to short cattle, and we knew we were going to be short cattle not only this year, but potentially into 2026 and partially into 2027, depending upon kind of where the herd build is. So there was at least anticipation, at least last year, that potentially we would lose capacity.
Uden says today's smaller herd doesn't mean less beef, with heavier carcass weights and strong demand keeping the industry moving.
There's 6-7% less cattle produced, but only 1 or 2% less on beef production.
But while cattle can move, families are another matter.
What's it do to my community? Lexington is a tremendously strong community.
Once the initial shock wore off, Uden says he began to feel confidence grow as community leaders strategize how to move forward. He expects the plant site to find new life. And while it may not be what it was, he says Nebraskans will make the best of it.
And this community of Lexington will bounce back.
The region now faces dual challenges, supporting those losing their jobs here while also reshaping the beef industry that is Nebraska's economic driver. Reporting, I'm Steve White.
All right, thank you very much for that information, Steve. We appreciate it. We'll keep tracking developments as they relate to this story. As they become available, we'll share those with you right here on Market Journal, along with on the radio. Just tune into the Rural Radio Network for future updates. Well, this year's growing season was one for the record books in one of the worst ways imaginable, southern rust. It was more severe in eastern Nebraska than the previous years. That marks 2 consecutive years that southern rust has expanded its reach here in the Cornhusker State. While it's natural to reflect on these occurrences and wonder why southern rust was able to make another big comeback, misinformation on this topic can spread even faster than southern rust itself. That's why the Market Journal team caught up with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Tamra Jackson-Ziems to clarify what producers should be focusing on as we head into 2026.
Well, there's several things that I've been hearing on the grapevine that are kind of spreading around the countryside, and I wanted to put some of these things to rest so that people don't come away from this season with some misconceptions that could impact them if they're trying to make management decisions. And for me, the biggest one is that southern rust cannot overwinter in Nebraska or anywhere nearby for that matter. So the rust fungi have to have green living corn tissue to infect other rusts as well. And so the closest it may overwinter or really survive would be the farthest north that corn can grow year round. And so that's probably down in Mexico. And so those southern winds have to bring that up into the United States and up into the Midwest and the Great Plains. And it's not unusual to have a little southern rust every year. In fact, 19 of my 20 years here in Nebraska, we've confirmed southern rust, but it does not often or rarely to the extent of what we saw in 2025. And so that's something I want to emphasize. It doesn't overwinter. You're not likely to see that level of rust again. It all depended this year on the weather conditions when those spores arrived and how favorable that was for disease development. One thing about the rust fungi is that they're very, very specific. Almost every important plant species, or even some of the more obscure ones, out in our pastures like brome grass, they all have rust diseases. Fortunately for us, those are very specific and you don't see a lot of hopping between species. And so even though it looks like southern rust on our brome grass and some other species, it's not. It's a different species. Corn is the only one that we know that is the host for the specific species causing southern rust. So that's really good news. But as you might imagine, the same conditions that favor rust on corn also favor rust and other diseases on other plants. And so that's probably what people were seeing. And we've had questions about a super strain of southern rust that we're looking at, and that's not true either. I think what we really witnessed this year was a combination of the most favorable possible conditions, weather conditions and also canopy conditions inside the fields. Optimally, the perfect conditions are about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty mild. And I think we never exceeded about 100 degrees this year, and we averaged in many locations around Nebraska, especially eastern Nebraska, kind of averaged around 80 degrees on many of those days. And many of those days were also overcast. And so we had a lot more cloud cover and reduction in solar radiation. Some parts of the state, like up north, we even had some smoke cover as well. And so that helped keep temperatures more moderate and keep things much more humid as well. Very favorable for rust diseases. I've also gotten a lot of questions this year about performance of our fungicides, and people were worried that maybe they didn't work as well this year. And again, I think what's happening is our fungicides work very well, but how well they work really depends on us applying them at the correct time and doing a good job applying them. And so a lot of that means getting good penetration into the canopy and good leaf coverage, which is really critical to get the best effects from fungicides. And we haven't in the past had as much disease as we've had this year. And so when we've fallen short on any of those, it's become much more obvious. Plus, having overwhelmingly favorable conditions meant that we just had a lot more disease than normal. And so I think that may have exposed a few weaknesses and caught a lot of people off guard. Selecting resistant hybrids is always a good idea. That's not going to be as easy for southern rust. We just don't have as much resistance out there in hybrids that are well adapted for Nebraska. And although that's unfortunate, I would say beef up, kind of scouting is always an excellent idea in your area, but also looking at resources that may come out from Extension, from the Crop Protection Network, where we are trying to monitor disease movement around the country. And so I would do that, monitor your own fields, and be prepared to make an application if necessary. And most years probably don't need to.
Another big thanks to Tamra for her time on Market Journal. If you'd like more insights from her and the other Nebraska Extension professionals, we invite you to visit the website cropwatch.unl.edu. Up next, we move along, and it is time to turn our attention over to the markets. As discussed at the top of the show, the announcement of Tyson's plant closure in Lexington sent shockwaves through the cattle markets. We were joined earlier this week in the studio by UNL ag economist Elliott to discuss this and other developments in the cattle markets. The show earlier in the program, we talked about that closure of Tyson's plant in Lexington. I'm curious how the futures market in particular reacted immediately following that and here in the weeks after.
Yeah, it was limit down for several days and really kind of bottomed out on that 208 per hundredweight. Since it's kind of rebounded, even earlier in this week, we were able to have quite a few rallies, days where we had positive rallies. So I think the market is at least sorting some of that cattle out, sorting out what's the news, what's the rumor, and then markets have been kind of able to react. I think that's had some implications for the cash trade for sure, and particularly when we talk about this north-south kind of trade differential. Normally it would tend to kind of favor, the southern plains as we kind of gone in, but the last couple weeks in particular, it's been quite sharp and quite large, really discounting the northern plains kind of cattle. And that has a lot to do with, if we don't have capacity, then where those cattle are going to go, and it's more expensive to ship them kind of other places. So those kind of short-term, dynamics has nothing to do with the overall kind of market trends, but just to reflect that we're sorting cattle out, and we will for the next several weeks.
How do you think, there's some big feed yards that I'm sure have tried to make their alternative plans, but for smaller producers, how will they feel the impact of that closure, probably on some of those cash trades here coming up in January, right?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two reactions that we need to kind of separate out. The first is kind of this kind of short, immediate impact. We're talking several months. They're going to be discounted pretty heavily. Especially when we think about kind of where those cattle are going to go. We saw this in the early part of COVID. Once again, in either the JBS plant when we had the fire in Grand Island, and also the Tyson plant down in Kansas. We see kind of short-term fluctuations, kind of market shocks, and then that kind of dissipates over time. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt in the short run, right? People are still losing money, markets are still down. When we talk about long run of like losing capacity or losing a plant of this nature, it tends to decrease price in the long run. So some of the estimates that are out there that by losing a plant kind of the size of Lexington, you might go down 2.5% of what we would have normally observed if we had that plant versus if we didn't. And so even though we have short-term fluctuations, we're not going to be able to rebound as high because this capacity is not there. And so we're looking at, and that's kind of separated out between, what is that, across states and across different companies. And so, but whether we're in the northern plains and southern plains, cattle prices are going to be affected long term.
Let's talk about some of the other factors influencing live and feeder cattle. On the feeder cattle front, you brought up the value of gain. What do you mean by that? What are you watching?
Yeah, when we talk about the value of gain, this is kind of the really signal of how much weight to put on post-weaning. We're finishing up weaning. We're deciding, should we sell in December for either tax reasons or any kind of selling in January. And so the value of gain is really the market signal that tells us, should we put on weight and to what weight we should put them on to. And so really when we're talking about the value of gain, a lot of that market has really pushed towards kind of selling at 550. The market's there. There's not a huge market incentive. And so that's really what the market's been kind of telling us. So if we're retaining cattle into the new year or to a different point, then we want to know at what weight we're going to do that, and if the market is actually going to pay us to put that. We can wrap that value gain with different like price risk management strategies, futures, options, LRP, but we just want to make sure that we're actually penciling that out and making sure that we're going to be profitable in the long run.
Certainly a lot of discussions in the cattle market about trade. We had the Brazilian beef discussions coming out of the White House, what they were going to do. Remind us where we're at with that right now in Brazilian beef.
Yeah, Brazil kind of fits into this other category of imported product. This is separate from other tariff rate quotas of like Australia, and Canada and Mexico. But essentially we import lean beef. When we think about cattle that are harvested, we have what's called 50s, 50% meat, 50% lean. When we import lean, we mix that with 50/50s, and with that, we're able to make ground beef. And when we think about ground beef, it really can go two places, and go to food service and go to retail. If it's in food service, about 60% of all the product that's consumed at food service is ground beef. And about 40% of the product that's consumed in retail is ground beef. So ground beef is an important market in the cattle industry. When you think about cattle processing, normally they say, if you can't move ground beef, you can't kill cattle because there's just so much ground beef to move. So a lot of that import products is basically packers trying to say, we either have to kill more cows in the dairy or the beef, or we have to import this product just to satisfy kind of consumers' demand for ground beef.
Mm-hmm. Also at the same time, we have the ongoing situation. The Mexican border is closed due to concerns around New World screwworm. We haven't really had any new developments from the Ag Secretary on that front in a while. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think kind of the big question that's been kind of floating around the industry is when, if at all, this is going to open. We obviously saw the kind of that changes on the cattle on feed report and kind of where cattle distribution is happening. A lot of that has to do with we don't have Mexican imports on feeder cattle. And when we saw even the Tyson plant going down to one shift in their Texas plant, that had a lot to do with saying we still believe in, that this area can process a lot of cattle. They're just not there right now, and they're not there because they're not importing Mexican feeder cattle. They are going to start flying the Mexican-U.S. border, releasing sterile male flies that as well, in addition to their Tampico facility. So I think what I'm hearing is a lot of just sit and wait. Let's see if that's actually being effective. And if it is, then there's probably a staged development there to where we can reopen the border and, more feeder cattle will come in the United States.
We appreciate Elliott stopping by the studio, give us his 2 cents on the cattle markets this week. As always, we welcome your feedback and your questions for our analysts here on Market Journal. So if you have a question you want to ask one of our future analysts, whether it's on the grain or livestock side, go ahead and email that in so I can pass your question right along. Well, West Holt FFA has been a range judging contest dynasty for more than a decade, and this year's team is no exception. Range judging challenges students to gain a better understanding of Nebraska range conditions. Since 1954, this annual contest has provided youth with an opportunity to keep learning how to keep their range lands productive and sustainable. You can learn more about the secrets to West Holt FFA's chapter success in this area in the December issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It's now time we turn our attention over to the weather. Nebraska Extension's Eric Hunt, he's standing by. Eric, things were looking quite seasonably festive outside as the Christmas weather snuck in right after Thanksgiving for some of our viewers. How are things shaping up as we turn to the next 7 days?
Well, thanks, Bryce. I think most of the northeastern portions of east central Nebraska has a chance of seeing some snow here today on Saturday. But otherwise, I think we're looking at a relatively dry week with some up and down temperatures, mostly on the mild side. It'll be kind of a nice little break. reason we're looking at mild temperatures, at least at times this week, ridging here will be pretty prominent across the western portion of the continent. With troughing here over Hudson Bay, and the colder temperatures will be mostly confined across the eastern portion of the United States. We're probably looking at a cold front coming through the state about every 48 to 60 hours, but the main storm track will be to our north, so I think we're going to be kept mostly dry here across the state for the next 7 to 10 days once we get past Saturday. Maybe some slight chance of moisture across the state on Wednesday, but in general, though, I think we're looking at relatively mild temperatures coming in, especially once we get past Sunday. Which will be our coldest day here across the state, with highs only in the lower to mid-teens here across ports of northeastern Nebraska. Getting a little bit warmer down here across ports of the southeastern and south central Nebraska, but generally getting a lot warmer as you get out here in the Panhandle. I think we should be getting well into the 40s on Sunday. The warmer air will be spreading toward the east on Monday, so again, probably at about 10 to 15 degrees across this portion of the state on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday likely will be our warmest days of the week, with temperatures probably getting into the 40s for everybody. And I think on Tuesday, there's going to be a pretty good chance for a lot of central and southern sections of the state, and also western Nebraska as well, getting the 50s, may even crack 60 degrees here around McCook and Imperial on Tuesday and Wednesday. Probably cooling off a little bit as we head into Wednesday and Thursday with another cold front coming through. So again, I think we're going to see frontal passes coming through on a fairly regular basis, so temperatures will be occasionally cooling off, with temperatures probably being coldest in northeastern Nebraska for the week. But in general, though, I think we're looking at the main bulk of precipitation staying well to our north, and not necessarily looking at a particularly active week here. There will be at least occasional chances of snowfall up near the Great Lakes region. 8 to 14 outlook shows warm west, cool east continuing. Now, I think as we head into next weekend, we may see a ridging move back into the central portion of the U.S., and there are some signs. We may see a nice surge of warm air coming back here in the Midwest by next weekend, with a pretty strong cold frontal passes coming through the state next Saturday or Sunday. So there's a possibility we may see much colder temperatures in Nebraska than we see over in Indiana, Ohio by the time we get it later this next weekend. And there are some indications that may be the first taste of another major cold blast coming in here about between December 17th and 20th. Now, again, there's not a lot of consistency in the models right now. There are indications that the polar vortex is going to get up to some more shenanigans as we head toward closer to the holidays. Don't be too surprised if we see another major blast of cold air come into the northern plains and into our portion of the country as we head toward about, say, 10, 12 days from now. CPC shows lower than average precipitation favored here across most of the state, or at least the southern portion of the state. Again, I'm not real bullish on anybody in the state picking up much moisture here the next 7 to 10 days. That may start changing though as we head toward about December 17th toward the 20th. Drought monitor, we did see more expansion of abnormal dryness across portions of central Nebraska, some additional drought expansion into portions of eastern Nebraska. Also saw some severe drought put into place here across Morrill County. Again, we have been very, very dry here across this portion of the state the last couple of months, so I think the degradation there was certainly warranted. Did see some snowfall across eastern Nebraska this past weekend, as you mentioned, Bryce, less as we went toward the west. And again, we are really not starting off the season very well here in the Rockies, generally less than 50% of snow water equivalent, so we really could use some more snowfall here. Soil temperatures generally the low to mid 30s across the state, and the temperature and precipitation roundup for the week ending November 29th, 2025. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, we appreciate the update, Eric. Thanks for tracking that weather. Well, finally today, we are gearing up for next week, the 2025 edition of the Nebraska Ag Expo. We do so by looking back to last year's show. These days, precision agriculture, it's helping farmers become more profitable and more sustainable. Green Eye Technology is one of the companies aiming to help farmers achieve those goals.
Next week, ag producers and professionals will be seeing the latest and greatest in ag technology at the Nebraska Ag Expo. While there, producers will have the opportunity to see top-of-the-line tech equipped with AI learning technology. During our time at last year's event, we caught up with one company known as Green Eye Technology, who looked to revolutionize pest control by moving away from wasteful broadcast spraying to a more precise and selective alternative.
So basically, we want to reduce the herbicides that you use in the field while increasing the profitability of your crop. So we don't have exact numbers yet, but we do know that from using less chemicals that you're going to have an increased yield. So basically the way our system's designed, so we're going to use the main tank that you have on your existing machine, and then we add an extra tank. So it's a dual line, dual product system. So the broadcast line will still put down your pre-emerge just like you did before. And then we're going to use our spot spray where we have tips or nozzle bodies on there every 10 inches along the boom. So when it sees a weed, it'll just spray a 10-inch by 10-inch area. Obviously using less chemical, but we're still getting rid of the weeds that are in there. And because you're not spraying directly on the crop, it doesn't have to metastasize or absorb that. So it'll get you a better yield, especially on later season in the crop. It ain't going to affect the plant health like it would normally if you broadcast spray.
One problem that is plaguing some producers in the Cornhusker State is glyphosate-resistant weeds like Palmer amaranth. This particular plant is capable of reducing corn yields by up to 90% and 80% in soybeans. This could be a devastating adversary for many producers around the U.S. However, utilizing selective spray tech like this could be a useful tool in the battle against resistant weed species.
Well, the biggest thing is, so when we spray that 10 by 10, the way we have our nozzle tip designed, so we're getting a really good coverage on that 10 by 10. And because you're only spraying a small area, now you can actually increase the whatever you're putting in there, if it's status or something like that, you can increase that amount in there. You won't get above label because you're using 10 to 15% of what you normally do. You'll get a better kill on those resistant weeds because you can put the right chemical on it and you're not affecting the rest of the plants.
Green Eye touts an average of 87% reduction in chemical use by its users. Beyond ensuring better soil and plant health along with improved yields, utilizing precision spraying technology also has the potential to save you more money on inputs that seem to get more and more expensive year after year.
Well, chemical prices will only continue to go up. At some point, the government's going to get more fussy about what you put on. If you're only putting on 10 to 15% of it, obviously it's better for the water, it's better for everything. But the biggest thing is it's a huge savings that's in there. And if you figure on soybeans, 10% increase in yield, 4 to 5 bushel an acre, that adds up really fast if you're doing thousands of acres.
In short, this company's main goal is to provide alternative and sustainable solutions for current crop protection practices in order to increase productivity and profitability for farmers. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Good stuff there, Bill. Always plenty to see at the Nebraska Ag Expo. If you'd like to learn more about Green Eye technology and how they could benefit your operation, you can visit their website. It is greeneye.ag. And if you're planning on going out to the Nebraska Ag Expo next week, stop by at their booth to see their product up close and personal. Well, that is going to do it for this week's edition of Market Journal. As a reminder, if you missed one of our stories, we invite you to visit Market Journal online on our YouTube channel, along with social media, where we invite you to join in on the conversation. Hope to see you right back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.